The subject for the event is emotion and creativity. Well, here's an emotion for you, love. More specifically, because we're in the business of marketing, brand love. It's a subject still regularly evoked in the PowerPoint charts of marketers, agencies, academic studies and our trade publications. And in fact, just before I wrote the chapter for Eat Your Greens, I noticed that Campaign had a feature on the 5 things marketers need to know to build brand love. And it had been written by 5 different marketers. And why shouldn't marketers want it? You know, they do. Here's an image captured from the US offices of the tech company Oath, build brands people love. And in fact, it was captured by Linda Boff. She is the CMO of GE. And she added this comment, spotted at Oath's offices and loved. A good mantra for us marketers. And I think many of us might nod along to that. But within about 20 minutes, her tweet had been retweeted by one Byron Sharp, who I'm sure everybody knows. I'm not going to explain who he is, who was, of course, having absolutely none of it. So misguided. We have so many more important priorities. This stuff is an embarrassment to marketers. And so no surprises here, to many of us here. And it seemed to me that this tweet was a microcosm of one of the great rifts in our industry today, between those of us who believe brands have an emotional role to play in people's lives and what is known as the evidence-based school of marketing, who question the whole idea of brand love. What they argue is that marketers should focus on salience, repetition, and targeting breadth, and that marketing should take a much more logical, transactional view of how people interact with brands. They deny the existence of brand love, and they pour scorn on what is often given its commercial objective, which is loyalty. And it seems to me, and I think that tweet is evidence of it, that this isn't a sort of well-mannered divergence of views down one of our sort of arcane marketing byways. The question it raises, for me actually, is our discipline really so plastic that it's wide open to interpretation at the most vital and significant interface of all, consumers and brands? And one of the issues here, I think, is looseness of language. Love is a really short word, but it is a huge one. You know, with those 4 letters, we seek to articulate the most profound, the most mysterious, but one of the most desirable emotions of the human condition. And perhaps love is best reserved for those deep human relationships and kept sacred for people that we care about most fiercely and connect with most deeply. Plus, of course, those special animals that sometimes charm their way into our lives. So this is actually a picture of my son. If he knew I was showing this, he'd be really pissed off. A picture of my son and our dog. And so, you know, I love them both, and Leo loves Wave, and actually Wave the dog clearly is pretty, you know, loving Leo right back there. So there's a big connection, a big meaningful relationship going on right there. And maybe, okay, love can justifiably extend to religion or country, but brands? Are they really up to bearing the weight of such a word? It was my question for the chapter in the book, and to be honest, I answer it pretty quickly. While there are always going to be a few consumers out there, a few zealots who are going to confess an enduring love for a brand, I would suggest that they are few and far between, and well, kind of just not your average shopper, actually. Because if you think about most everyday sectors, like those that populate the average supermarket or drugstore, it's hard to imagine them on the receiving end of true love. So brand love is an exaggeration, it's an overstatement. But I won't be the first marketer out there to recognise that there is an emotional something going on between consumers and brands. There is something, isn't there, between these 2 extremes, between those transactional buying experiences at one end, when you buy a product you need, you get it, you use it, and true love at the other end. And for each of us, I would suggest there are brands in that kind of middle space that go beyond the transactional. They're brands we feel some sort of affinity with, some kind of closeness, brands that we would miss if they didn't exist, even though other brands could perform that functional bit just as well. And they're a cluster that we come back to time and time again for non-rational reasons. Now, my own cluster might look something like this, and I reckon all of you could put one of these together. But the book is about evidence. What's the evidence for this emotional something? Well, it just so happens that there is some remarkable and quite recent evidence to show the power of brands that people feel close to. And it shows how they can really affect their whole mood, their whole sense of well-being. It was published in one of marketing's most prestigious journals, the JCR, the Journal of Consumer Research. And what these three researchers found is that when people contemplate or see brands that they feel close to, it can help reduce felt pain. So it was an experimental piece of methodology, and there were 7 experiments. But basically what they did in order to measure pain was they get people to put their hands in an ice bucket, which is a standard measure of pain. And that was the methodology that they used. And the main experiment was, it was really this. They had an ice bucket, they had a temperature gauge, and they had a screen on which respondents were shown different images. And what they did is they divided the respondents into 2 groups. So one group was asked to name a brand that they felt close to, and these were just some of the ones that they came up with. And for this half of the group, when they put their hand in the ice bucket, they were shown a high-res image of just the logo of that brand that they'd chosen. And for the other half, they were shown a neutral valence object, and in this case, it was a chair. And at the end of the ice bucket session, all of the respondents were asked to rate their pain on a standard scale. And here are the results. So what you can see is that for those that were shown their chosen brand, their pain was lower, which is kind of amazing, really. But it fits with a lot of what we know about the psychology of pain as well. This was just one of 7 experiments, and they were all sort of variations around the same idea. But across the 7 experiments, the authors concluded that the current research demonstrated that contemplating close brand relationships insulates against physical pain. And their interpretation was that it had endorsed a concept originally put forward about 20 years ago by an academic called Susan Fournier, that brands can function as effective relationship partners. And, so she talked about relationship partners, and I think there are various industry labels around. There's brand love, bonding, brand meaning, attachment, emotional connection. These are all the kind of labels that we bandy around for this something. But I think we can do better in defining what the something is. And the place to look is the 30-decade body of research that some of these academics have developed. And they're mainly from the US, but a couple from the UK. And what they say is that brands have a role to play in our personal identity. And what that's really about is at the heart of the theory is that for most of human history, it was basically impossible to express who you really were. It was mandated by gender, by rank, by age. To be yourself was to know your place. We had no choice. If you were born into farm labouring, you stayed into farm labouring. But that actually changed in relatively recent times, in the 60s, in the era that the academics call the postmodern era, where people could choose who they wanted to be. And that notion was conceptualised by these 3 reflexive questions: what to do, how to act, who to be. And there's a whole body of work that's built around this theory. And it culminated in the expression, the project of self. And what that means is that we actively construct our identity out of the available symbolic resources to weave a coherent account of who we are, basically. Now, the really important thing to marketers and planners is that the available symbolic resources includes brands. So we choose brands to help us represent the person we feel we really are, or to help us demonstrate a particular area or role that we want to play. And it's not just display brands either, which is a vital point to recognise. It's just as important to brands that live behind cupboard doors that other people don't really see, because what's really important about these brands is they reaffirm ourselves to ourselves. They help us reassure ourselves that we are the person that we want to be. They play part of that role. So Instead of talking about brands people love, I think it's better and more accurate to talk about a brand for me. Those brands that we welcome into our membrane of self, that we don't just buy, we kind of join, brands that become part of who we are. Now, that's kind of half of the chapter. The other half was devoted to answering these questions. What kind of brands have it? How do you build it? What commercial rewards does it bring? And I guess that third one is really important, where I think I end up with a sensible commercial objective of brands for me, which is this one: loyalty at parity. The tendency to prefer this brand when all else is equal. And of course, that's not very often the case, is it? There's very often, asymmetrical distribution or different spends. But when all else is equal, loyalty at parity can give you the edge. And a brand for me can give you loyalty at parity, and that's well worth aiming for. Thank you.